The Moonstone Cathedral of Sarvelin had been built to swallow sound, but tonight it could not swallow the weight of 3,000 wolves holding their breath at once. Merwin stood in the gallery above the western nave, her shoulders pressed flat against a column of black marble, her veil pulled low across her face. From this height, she could see everything: the ceremonial torches blazing in their iron sconces, the great moon window casting silver light across the polished floor, the pack lords in their ancestral colors, the council mothers in their gray wool, the common-born wolves crammed shoulder to shoulder in the standing ranks below. And at the far end of the cathedral, on the raised stone of the claiming altar, stood Varric, the Alpha King. Her king, in every secret moonlit hour of the past 8 months, the man who had pressed his forehead to hers in the river meadow last autumn and whispered that fate had marked them before either of them had drawn breath. The man whose teeth had broken her skin 4 weeks ago in the old hunting lodge, leaving the claiming bite that still pulsed beneath her left collarbone like a second heartbeat. She should not have come. She had sworn to him only yesterday that she would wait at the orchard cottage until he sent for her. He had been so certain, so calm. "I will end this farce before it begins, my Merwin. I will refuse the council's chosen and ride to you before the moon is high." But the orchard cottage had been too quiet. The silence had grown teeth. And so she had wrapped herself in a borrowed servant's cloak and come to see for herself what her future would look like. What she saw made her grip the marble until her knuckles burned. The council's chosen stood at Varric's right hand. Iselin of House Drovenmare, draped in white silk and silver stitching, her platinum hair coiled in the 7 sacred braids of a candidate accepted for claiming. Beautiful, composed, smiling the small, cold smile of a woman who had been promised a throne since the day she was weaned. The High Speaker's voice rolled across the cathedral. "Varric, last son of the Moonborn line, sovereign of the Argent Hills, bloodkeeper of the old oaths, the council has presented its chosen. The packs have given their consent. The altar awaits your acceptance." Merwin's mouth went dry. He was supposed to refuse. He had promised. Varric did not move. The hush stretched. 3,000 wolves leaning forward, the torches popping softly. Somewhere far below, a child whimpered and was hushed. Then he stepped onto the altar. The mark on Merwin's collarbone went cold. That was wrong. The mark had burned for 8 weeks straight, hot as a brand, every time she thought of him. Now, in the moment that should have set it on fire, it had gone cold, as if the bond itself had been put to sleep. Varric extended his hand toward Iselin. Iselin laid her fingers across his palm. Merwin could not breathe. Her ribs would not move. Her throat had closed. The veil swam in front of her eyes, and she pressed her free hand against her stomach, against the small, hard curve there that no one in the world knew about except her and the herbalist in the lower city, who had sworn on her own bones to keep silent. 2 months along, the old woman had whispered. Maybe 3. "The child has a strong heartbeat, dear, a very strong heartbeat." She had been planning to tell him tonight. The High Speaker raised the silver chalice. "Varric of the Moonborn, do you accept this woman as your claimed mate, sealed before the altar, witnessed by the packs, bound by the old law?" Varric opened his mouth to speak, and stopped. His head turned, slow and strange, like a man hearing a sound from the bottom of a deep well. His eyes, which had been flat and dull all evening, sharpened. His nostrils flared. His shoulders, which had been carrying themselves stiffly under the ceremonial pelt, dropped 1/2 inch as something inside him lifted its head. Merwin's cold mark flared hot, hot as a fresh burn, hot as a sword pulled from a forge. She pressed her hand flat against it and bit down on her own knuckles to keep from making a sound. Across the cathedral, Varric's gaze swept the standing ranks, swept the pack lords' benches, swept the gallery, searching like a wolf catching a scent in the wind. His eyes lifted to the gallery. His eyes found her. Even through the veil, even through the distance, even through whatever had been done to him that had kept him standing on that altar with another woman's hand in his. His face changed. Every wolf in the cathedral felt it before they saw it. The air pressure in the great vaulted space dropped. The torches guttered. A low growl began somewhere under the stone floor, a sound that seemed to come from the bones of the building itself. Varric ripped his hand out of Iceland's grip. The chalice fell. Silver wine spilled across the altar like blood. "Stop the ceremony," he said. No one moved. Iceland had gone the color of curdled milk. "Stop the ceremony," Varric said again, louder this time, and now the growl was rising in his throat, and his eyes had gone the molten gold of a wolf surfacing through a man. He turned to the assembled council, and his voice cracked across the cathedral like a falling axe. "Find her." 100 heads turned. The pack lords were on their feet. "Find her," Varric said a third time, and this time it was a roar, and the torches blew sideways, and the great moon window above his head shivered in its frame. "Whoever stands in this hall, whoever calls themselves loyal to the Moonborn line, find her. She is here. She is here." Merwin ran. She did not remember turning. She did not remember leaving the gallery. She remembered the slap of her own shoes on stone, and the burning beneath her collarbone and her hand flat against her stomach, and the awful certainty that he was coming for her, that he had felt her, that the bond had pierced through whatever spell had dulled him, and that he would tear this cathedral apart looking for her if she did not move now. She could not be found. Not here. Not tonight. If they found her, they would kill her child before it ever drew a first breath. She did not yet know who he was, but she knew it the way prey knows it. She had felt their eyes on her for a month now, ever since the night the candle in the orchard cottage had gone out by itself, and she had heard footsteps in the snow that did not belong. The servants' stair was empty. The kitchens were empty. Everybody in Sarvalin was in that cathedral. She slipped through the buttery, through the cold room, through the laundry yard where steam still rose from the morning's washing, and out through the postern gate where the cathedral's outer wall met the orchard wall. The night took her. She did not look back. Behind her, deep inside the Moonstone Cathedral, the Alpha King was on his knees on the altar, his fingers pressed against the spilled wine, the gold drained from his eyes, leaving only a desperate, hunted black. The High Speaker was bending toward him. Iselin was speaking, low and urgent. Varric did not seem to hear either of them. He was lifting his stained fingers to his face and breathing in. And under his breath, soft as a vow, soft as a prayer, soft as a wound, he was saying a name nobody else in that cathedral had ever heard him speak before. 4 months later, in the salt wind country south of the Grey Crown Mountains, the village of Hollowbeck had decided that the new midwife was strange, but useful, and that was good enough. Merwin lived in a stone-walled croft at the edge of the moor, 1/2 mile from the last cottage in the village, with a thatched roof she had patched herself and a goat named Bramble who hated everyone except her. She had given the village headman the name Sable. She had told him she was a sailor's widow from the eastern coast. She had wept the first time he asked, and he had not asked again. Now her belly was full and round and impossible to hide, and the women of Hollowbeck brought her bread and salt and small carved wooden charms for the child, and asked her in low voices when her time would come. She said soon, and they nodded and went away, satisfied. She was not soon. She still had 2 months, perhaps a little less. She was simply enormous because she was carrying twins, though the village midwife she had quietly trained as her assistant had not yet realized this, and Merwin was not eager to share the information. 2 heartbeats meant 2 heirs. 2 heirs meant twice the reason for someone to want her dead. She lived very carefully. She did not go into the village after dark. She did not light a lamp in any window that faced the road. She kept a knife under her pillow and a second knife in the cradle she had not yet finished building. The bond mark beneath her collarbone had not faded. That was the thing that woke her some nights, weeping into her own hands. It should have faded. He had stood on the altar with another woman. The mark should have died on her skin like a bruise healing. Instead, it had grown darker. It pulsed in time with her own heartbeat, slow and steady, and sometimes, in the depths of the night, she felt a second pulse beneath her own, a heartbeat that was not hers and not the children's, beating against the inside of the mark as if knocking at a door. He was looking for her. She knew it the way a sailor knows weather. She did not understand why. The morning everything broke open began ordinary. Bramble the goat needed milking. The herbs above the hearth needed turning. The widow Cosma from the village came up the path before midday with a basket of barley loaves and a face so full of news it could barely hold itself shut. "You will not believe what came down the coach road this morning," Cosma said, settling onto the bench by the hearth. "Soldiers, real ones. Argent Hills colors, red and gray, the moonborn crest stitched right on their cloaks. 3 of them. Riding hard." Merwin's hands stopped moving over the herb basket. "They stopped at the Bell and Stag," Cosma went on. "Asked the innkeeper if he had seen any women traveling alone. Pregnant women. Quiet ones, with a mark on the collarbone or the shoulder." The barley loaf in Merwin's hand crumbled to dust between her fingers. "What did the innkeeper say?" "Said he had not. But Sable, dear, listen." Cosma leaned forward, her voice dropping. "The Alpha King has gone to ruin." Merwin made herself breathe. To ruin. He stopped his own claiming ceremony, stopped it on the altar, in front of everyone, refused House Drovenmare's daughter and threw the chalice down and said there was another, his true mate, and she had been in the cathedral that night, and she had run, and he could not find her. Cosma's eyes were enormous. He has been looking for her ever since. 4 months. He has torn open every great house in the kingdom. The crops are failing along the Argent border. The packs are turning feral. They say the moon herself has dimmed over Sarvelin because the king cannot sleep. Merwin sat down very slowly on the stool by the hearth. The room had begun to tilt. "They say he will pay any sum," Cosma whispered. "To anyone who can bring him news of a young woman with the moonborn claim mark and a child in her belly." Merwin could not feel her hands. She could feel only the mark beneath her collarbone, burning now, and she pressed her palm against it and forced a smile. "What a strange tale. Thank you for the bread, Cosma. I think I need to lie down. The children are pressing on my back today." Cosma left, satisfied. The door closed. Merwin sat for a long time without moving. He had stopped the ceremony. He had stopped the ceremony. She had been so certain that she had seen him reach for Islin's hand. She had not stayed long enough to see what happened after she fled. She had assumed. Every nightmare for 4 months had been built on an assumption. The bond mark beneath her collarbone gave a long, slow, rolling pulse that made her gasp. Something was coming. She rose and went to the window. The light on the moor was wrong. The sky was clear, but the light had a strange quality, as if it had been polished. Bramble the goat was standing very still in the yard, ears pricked toward the tree line. There were wolves in the heather, 6 of them, low and gray, watching the croft. Merwin stepped back from the window. She had time. They were watching, not attacking. She could go out the back, into the bog path, and from there into the smuggler's track that wound down to the coast. She had her hand on the back door's latch when someone knocked at the front. 3 soft taps. Polite, unhurried. A man's voice on the other side, old, careful. "Lady Merwin, I have not come to harm you. I will speak only what you ask me to hear, and then I will go if you tell me to go. The wolves in the heather are mine, and they will not move unless I tell them to. Open the door." Nobody had spoken her real name in 4 months. Hearing it from a stranger's mouth was like being struck. She stood with her hand on the latch and her other hand on the small, hard curve of her stomach, and she opened the door. The man on her threshold was thin and old and dressed in plain traveling wool, with a beard the color of birch bark and eyes the color of old amber. He held his hands out to either side, palms forward, weaponless. Behind him, in the dooryard, the 6 gray wolves had laid themselves down in a wide arc, noses on their paws. "My name is Orin Half-Tongue," the old man said quietly. "I serve the king's grandfather and the king's father, and now I serve the king. He does not know I have come. May I sit down? I have ridden 3 nights without stopping, and I am 81 years old." Merwin could not speak. She stepped aside. Orin sat at her hearth, as if the hearth were already familiar. He looked at the cradle in the corner, half finished, and his face did something complicated and tender. "2," he said softly. "I thought it might be." "How did you find me?" "I did not find you. The bond found you. I followed the bond." He reached into the front of his coat and withdrew a folded piece of parchment, sealed in dark green wax. "Before I tell you what is in this letter, I must tell you what was done to your king. Will you listen?" Merwin lowered herself into the chair opposite him. Her legs would no longer hold her. "He was not himself the night of the ceremony," Orin said. "He had been given a draft for 10 days before. A thing called silvercap, mixed with the sap of the white throat ash, and 3 other ingredients I could not name. It does not poison the body. It poisons the wolf. It makes the wolf lie down inside the man and sleep, and while it sleeps, the man becomes a kind of doll. He will stand on an altar and reach for a hand he has been told to reach for, and he will not remember any of it after the draft wears off." Merwin made a small wounded sound she did not mean to make. "Who?" she whispered. "House Drovenmeier. We cannot prove it yet, because the man who mixed the draft was found dead in the river, and the woman who served the king his wine has vanished. But House Drovenmeier was the only house with the means and the motive. They have been positioning the Lady Iselin since she was 12 years old. They were not going to lose her seat to a healer girl from the lower city." "He felt me," Merwin said. "Through the draft. He felt me, and the wolf woke up." "He felt you." The wolf came up screaming. He ripped the chalice off the altar and roared your name before half the cathedral. Then he collapsed, and the priests pulled him into the vestry. He woke at dawn knowing exactly what had been done to him. He has hunted you for 4 months. Orin held out the letter. "This was intercepted from a Drovenmar rider 3 weeks ago. It is why I came myself, and not a soldier. I did not trust any soldier with the route to your door." Merwin took the letter. Her hands were shaking. She broke the green wax. The handwriting was elegant. The message was short. "The orchard girl has been located south of the Grey Crowns. The matter will be closed before the next full moon." The line ends with her. "After that, the king grieves quietly, and we proceed." She read it twice. The next full moon was 3 nights away. "They are coming for me," she said. "They are already here," Orin said softly. He had risen. He was looking past her shoulder, through the window, at the moor. His old face had gone very still. The gray wolves in the dooryard were on their feet. Their hackles were up. They were not looking at the heather where they had been watching before. They were looking at the road. Merwin turned. In the long light of late afternoon, 6 riders had come over the rise of the moor road, riding hard, riding silent. Their cloaks were the color of dried blood. None of them carried a banner. The wind was wrong, pushing their scent away from the croft. But Merwin caught them. The bond mark beneath her collarbone had gone ice cold again, the way it had gone cold in the cathedral. The same cold, the same wrongness, the same draft. "Drovenmare assassins," Orin breathed. "Get behind me, my lady. Get into the cellar. Get anywhere there is stone between you and them." The first arrow came through the window before he had finished speaking. The arrow hissed past Orin's ear and struck the iron pot above the hearth with a sound like a hammer on a bell. The pot rang. The arrow shaft was black. The tip was wet. "Down," Orin said, and shoved her with surprising strength. Merwin went to her knees behind the heavy oak settle. A second arrow came through the window. A third punched clean through the croft's front door, splintering the wood inward, and buried itself in the far wall a hand's breadth from where her head had been a heartbeat earlier. Outside, the 6 gray wolves had stopped being wolves laid down in a dooryard and had become something else. She heard the snarls begin. She heard the screams of horses. She heard a man shout in the high-pitched panic of a person who has just realized the prey has teeth. Oren was already moving toward the door, shrugging off his traveling coat, his old hands fumbling at his belt for a short curved blade she had not even noticed he was carrying. "Stay down," he said. "My wolves will hold them as long as they can. Reinforcements are 2 hours out. You only need to be alive in 2 hours." "Oren, you cannot fight them. You are 81 years old." The old man turned in the doorway. His eyes had gone amber at the rims. His teeth, when he smiled, were not entirely a man's teeth. "My lady," he said gently, "I have been the king's first beta since before your mother was born." He stepped through the door, and as he stepped, his body unmade itself. The traveling wolf fell away. His shoulders broadened. His shape compressed and stretched at the same time, joints cracking, fur rolling up his arms in a wave the color of birch bark and old amber. He was a wolf before his second foot touched the threshold, and he was bigger than any wolf had a right to be. Merwin pressed her back against the settle. For one breath she could not move. The cold in her bond mark and the heat in her belly were fighting each other. She heard the crash of bodies meeting in the dooryard. She heard the dull sound of a sword striking armor. She heard one of the gray wolves yelp once, sharp and terrible, and then go silent. Then she heard a second sound, much worse, a boot on the stone of her back step. Someone had circled the croft. She had not bolted the back door. The latch lifted. The door eased open. A man came into her kitchen with a long dark blade held low and easy in his right hand, and a small crossbow loaded and cocked in his left. His face was wrapped in a black cloth from the bridge of his nose down. His eyes, above the cloth, were perfectly calm. The eyes of a man who had done this many times. He saw her behind the settle. He raised the crossbow. Merwin had time for one thought. Not for herself. For the 2 small heartbeats inside her, which had begun to hammer wildly against the inside of her belly the moment the boot touched the back step. No, the word was not a word. It was a thing she did with her whole self. Something came up out of her. She had not known it was there. She had felt it once, when she was 9 years old, when a runaway cart horse had come down on a child in the lower city street, and she had pressed her hands over the child's broken ribs and watched the bones knit themselves back together while her grandmother screamed at her to hide it. "Never let anyone see. They will burn you." She had hidden it for 19 years. It came out now. It came out as light, pale gold light, the color of wheat in the last hour of harvest, pouring up out of her chest and her belly and her open mouth, filling the kitchen, washing across the assassin's face, and his crossbow, and his long, dark blade. It was not warm. It was not cold. It was simply present. And it was old. And it knew what it had been called for. The assassin's crossbow arm jerked sideways. The bolt buried itself in the ceiling beam. The man staggered backward, one hand clawing at his own face. "Witch!" he gasped through the cloth. He turned to run. Merwin stood up. The light was lifting her. The 2 heartbeats inside her belly had risen to meet the light, beating in time with each other, as if the children themselves had reached up and pulled her to her feet. She raised one hand toward the assassin's back. The light went with her hand. It struck him between the shoulder blades. He folded forward, dropped his blade, dropped to his knees, dropped to the floor. He did not get up. Merwin walked to the front door. The dooryard was a slaughterhouse. 3 of Oren's gray wolves were down. 2 of the assassins were down. The remaining riders had pulled back to the edge of the heather, and Oren in his birch bark wolf form was standing between them and the croft, swaying on his feet, one of his back legs not quite holding his weight. A 7th figure stepped out of the heather. A woman. In black, head to foot, her hair bound up under a hood. She carried no weapon. Even at this distance, Merwin knew her. The frozen lake eyes, the platinum hair under the hood, just visible at the temple. The cold, composed mouth. Iselin of House Drovenmare had come herself, the council's chosen, whose hand the king had thrown off the altar 4 months ago, had not waited at home for assassins to bring her news. She had come to watch the orchard girl die. Merwin stepped through her own front door into her dooryard, with the gold light still pouring off her shoulders, and Iselin saw her, and Islin's mouth opened in a small surprised circle, and then closed again into something colder than any look Merwin had ever seen on a human face. "Killer," Iselin said. 2 of the riders lifted crossbows. Merwin raised both hands. The light flared. It did not flare from her this time. It flared from her belly. 2 small, fierce light beats, twined together, joined hers and spilled outward in a ring, and the ring rolled across the dooryard and met the heather and the riders and Iselin, and where it touched, it pushed. The riders went off their horses. The horses went sideways. Iselin staggered backward 3 steps and went to one knee, her hood thrown off, her platinum hair spilling loose, and her cold mouth had finally found an expression, and the expression was fear. "What are you?" Iselin said. "I am tired," Merwin said. She did not mean to say it. It was the only true thing in her head. The light was already beginning to gutter. She had only ever held it for the count of 3 breaths in her whole life, and she had been holding it now for far longer than that, and the bond mark beneath her collarbone had begun to scream. He was close. The mark had gone past hot. It had gone past burning. It was a sound now, a high singing sound, and it was inside her chest, and it was pulling her like a hook in her ribs. A howl rose out of the south. Not from the croft, not from the heather. From the ridge a mile away, where the moor road climbed toward the gray crowns. It was not a wolf's howl. It was a wolf's howl shaped by something much older than a wolf. It was the sound of grief and rage and 4 months of sleepless nights, and it was rolling down the slope of the moor like a thrown spear, and it had been fired from a throat she knew. Iselin scrambled to her feet. Her eyes had gone very wide. "Move!" Iselin snapped at her riders. "Move! He is here!" Too late. Something black came over the ridge. Not a horse. A wolf. A wolf the size of a cart horse, the size of nothing that should exist in a kingdom that had not seen its old gods walk in 700 years. Its fur was black, with a sheen like wet ink. Its eyes, even at a mile, were burning gold. It was not running. It was unmaking the distance between itself and the croft. Each bound covered the ground 3 horses would have covered. The riders broke. They ran. Iselin did not run at first. She stood her ground for one long moment, staring at Merwin across the dooryard, and her face did a strange thing. It was not fear anymore. It was calculation, fast and clean. "You are not done yet, orchard girl," Iselin said softly. "You think this is the end. It is the door." Then she turned and ran for the heather and was gone. The black wolf came over the last rise of the moor at full speed, and an army came after him, hundreds strong. Merwin's knees gave out. She did not feel herself hit the ground. She felt very distantly 2 pairs of small, fierce kicks beneath her ribs, as if the children were saying, "We are still here. Mother, we are still here." She felt the gold light go out of her like a candle pinched between 2 fingers. She felt Oren's bloodied wolf form drag itself the last few yards across the dooryard to lie down between her and the open gate, his huge head laid across her ankles, his old amber eyes still open and still alive. The black wolf came through the gate. He stopped 6 feet from her. He did not shift. He did not approach. He stood there with his head lowered and his sides heaving, and a sound came up out of his chest that was not a growl and not a whimper. It was the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for 4 months and had just been allowed to let it out. She lifted her head. The black wolf's golden eyes were the only steady thing in the world. "Varric," she whispered. The wolf made a sound like a sob. He took 1 step forward, then another. Then he laid himself down on his belly in the bloody dirt of her dooryard, and he crawled the last 2 feet to her on his belly, like a creature begging not to be sent away, and he laid his huge dark head very gently across the curve of her belly, and the 2 heartbeats inside her belly answered him at once, and he closed his eyes, and the Alpha King of the Argent Hills, who had torn open a kingdom looking for her, began very quietly to cry. For a long moment, Merwin did not move. The black wolf's head was warm against the curve of her belly. His breathing was uneven, hitching the way a man's breath hitches when he has been crying for a long time. Beneath her dress, beneath her skin, the 2 small heartbeats had gone quiet, listening. She had imagined this moment in 9 different shapes over 4 months. In every shape, she had a list, rehearsed in the dark, over and over. The list had vanished. She lifted one hand and laid it on the side of his great dark muzzle, very lightly, the way a child touches something it is afraid will break. He shuddered under her palm. Then he shifted. The huge dark body folded inward, fur drawing back into skin, bone resettling, and a man knelt where the wolf had been. He was barely clothed in the torn remains of riding leathers around his waist. His chest was scored with old, half-healed cuts that should not have still been on him after 4 months. His face was thinner than she remembered. His eyes were rimmed in red. He did not get up. He stayed on his knees in the bloody dirt, his hands pressed flat against the earth on either side of him, as if he did not trust himself to come any closer without permission. "Merwin," he said. His voice broke on the second syllable. "You are real. I have dreamed you so many times. I had stopped believing the dreams meant anything. You are real." She could not answer. Her throat had closed. His eyes moved to her belly. The naked want in his face was the most painful thing she had ever seen on a person. "Two," he whispered. "I felt 2. In the cathedral, when the bond opened, I felt 2 heartbeats. I thought I was losing my mind. There are 2 of them." She nodded. He made a small wounded sound and pressed his forehead briefly to the dirt. When he lifted his head again, he had himself in hand. Barely. "May I come closer?" That was the question that finally broke her. The Alpha King of the Argent Hills, the wolf who had just torn across a moor like something from a children's nightmare, was kneeling 6 feet from her in his own torn skin, asking permission. "Yes," she said. He came to her on his knees. He crossed those 6 feet with his eyes on hers, and when he reached her, he sat back on his heels, and he laid one trembling hand flat against the curve of her belly, and he closed his eyes. The children kicked. Both of them. One under his palm, one against her ribs. A laugh came out of Varric's throat. It was a wet, shocked, broken laugh, and it turned almost at once into a sob, and he pressed his face against her shoulder and held very still. Merwin closed her own eyes. She had thought for 4 months that she would never feel this again. The simple animal weight of him against her. The smell of him under blood and sweat. That warm, dry scent like sun-baked stone and cold river water. His scent. The only scent her body had ever recognized as home. The list came back. "You let her touch you." He went very still against her shoulder. "I saw you. I saw you reach for her hand. I saw you stand on the altar with her hand in yours. I saw your face go empty, and I waited for you to keep your promise, and you did not. You stood there, and you reached for her, and the mark on my collarbone went cold, Varric. The mark went cold, as if you had cut it off me with your own teeth." She had not raised her voice. The words came out almost flat. Somehow that was worse. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and his eyes had gone full gold, the wolf right at the surface, and his hands were shaking against her belly. "They drugged me," he said. "I know. The old man told me. They had been drugging me for 10 days. I do not remember the day before the ceremony. I came back to myself standing on that altar with her hand in mine and your scent in the gallery, and I could not understand what was happening to my own body. The wolf was screaming inside me, and I could not reach him. I could not reach you. I could not reach me. Then how did you wake up? You. The mark. I felt it go hot when you saw me reach for her. The wolf came up through the draft the way a drowning man comes up through ice. I broke. He swallowed. I am told I roared your name across 3,000 wolves. I came back to myself in a vestry an hour later and was told you had run. I have not had a clean hour of sleep since. Why did I run? She whispered. She had not meant to ask it aloud. It had been the question gnawing under her ribs for 4 months. Why did I not stay one breath longer? Why did I not see what happened next? Varric's hand came up and cupped the side of her face. His thumb moved across her cheekbone, gentle, stunned. You ran, he said quietly, because someone in the gallery wanted you to. They knew the ceremony was about to fail. They knew the moment my wolf woke up, I would tear the cathedral apart looking for you. They could not let you be inside when that happened, because if I had found you in the cathedral, the children would have been safe. So they made certain you ran first. She stared at him. Who? I have a name, I suspect. The face will not survive the meeting. His thumb moved across her cheekbone. But that is not the wound, my heart. The wound is that you spent 4 months thinking I had chosen against you. 4 months carrying my children alone in a stone croft while I tore my kingdom apart looking for you. That is the wound. And I do not know how to apologize for a wound I did not mean to give. The tears came then. She had not cried, properly, since the 2nd month. She had wept dry, hopeless tears in her sleep and woken up exhausted. But she had not wept like this. She wept like the dam had finally been allowed to break. And Varric pulled her into his bare chest and folded his arms around her, his own face wet against the top of her head. When she could speak, she said into his collarbone, I thought they would die alone in the moor. I thought I would have to lie to them their whole lives about who their father was. They will know, Varric said, and his voice had gone fierce. They will be claimed before the altar by the High Speaker himself. There will be nothing left of House Drovenmire when the next moon rises but a name people are afraid to say out loud. She lifted her face. I felt you, she whispered. Every night. In my sleep. You came to me. You said you would find me. He went still. Those were not dreams, Merwin. I know. I know that now. My wolf. When the man slept, my wolf would walk the dark looking for you. Some mornings I was so certain he had not found you that I could not stand up. His mouth twisted. If I had known you were hearing him, I would have crawled across the kingdom to keep him reaching you longer. The mark beneath her collarbone, which had been singing all afternoon, gave one slow, deep pulse and went calm. Varric. Iselin was here. He went rigid. In the heather, 2 minutes before you came over the ridge, she was here, with her own riders, watching the assassins. She saw me put one of them down with the gold light. She saw me. She knows what I am. What you are. Varric repeated softly. I have not told you. I held a power back from you. My grandmother told me to hide it, and I hid it for 19 years. It came up out of me today because there was nothing else. Show me. She lifted one shaking hand and let a thread of the gold pour into her palm. It was thinner than it had been in the kitchen, frayed at the edges. But it was there. It curled in her hand like a small living thing. Varric stared at it. He did not flinch. He looked at it with the expression of a man who has just been handed the answer to a question he did not yet know he was asking. My love, he said, and his voice had gone hoarse. Do you know what you are? A healer. A witch. My grandmother said witch. You are an old blood. You are one of the moon-touched. We have not had one in the line in 7 generations. It is half the reason House Drovenmire wanted you dead. They knew. Iselin called this a door, not an end. Varric's face hardened. Behind him, Far down the moor road, his army had come over the ridge, hundreds of them, the red and gray banners moving in the wind. "Then we walk through it together," he said. "We ride for Sarvalin tonight. The children come with us. I will not leave your side until every last Drovenmar is on their knees in front of the altar where they tried to make me forget your name." He bent and kissed her forehead, then her bond mark, very gently, through the cloth of her dress. "Together?" she said, the way she had said it 1,000 times in dreams. "Always," Varric said. They rode through the night with the moor wind at their backs, and Varric's army strung out along the road behind them. 300 riders and twice that many wolves moving on foot through the heather. A great quiet column with no banners and no horns, because the king had ordered silence. Merwin rode in front of him on a black mare named Sorrowtide, his arm wrapped tight around her ribs, his cloak pulled around them both. The children had settled. The bond mark beneath her collarbone hummed low and steady, the way a hearth hums when the fire has been banked for the night. After 4 months of the ghost of him in her dreams, the actual weight of him at her back was almost unbearable. He told her things, as they rode. He told her about the morning after the cathedral. About waking on the floor of the vestry with no memory of the night before, and the residue of the draught still in his blood, and the moment he had understood what had been done to him. He told her about going to her old chamber in the lower city and finding it empty. The small wooden box where she had kept her grandmother's pendant tipped over, and the pendant gone. He told her he had broken every piece of furniture in that chamber with his bare hands, and Oren had had to drag him out before the building came down. He told her about the Council of 3 Hills, the holding of House Drovenmare, where he had ridden a month later with 60 wolves, and torn the great hall apart looking for any letter, any whisper of where she might have been taken. He had found nothing. He had threatened Iselin's father across his own dining table, and the old man had simply smiled and said, "I do not know what you mean, sire. Perhaps the girl has fled with another man, and women of her station often do." "He will not smile when I see him next," Varric said quietly against her hair. She laid her hand over his where it rested on her belly. "What about Iselin?" "Iselin has been in the capital all 4 months, attending council meetings, accepting condolences, behaving like a woman whose heart has been quietly broken." He laughed, a bitter sound. "And tonight she rode out of the capital herself to come watch you die. She has been playing a longer game than I knew. She knows what I am now. She knew before. The whole reason her family wanted you killed quickly is because they knew. Old blood breeds true. A child of an old bloodline and a moonborn alpha is a thing nobody in the Argent Hills has seen in 7 generations. 2 such children." His arm tightened around her ribs. "You were never going to be allowed to deliver them. Not while a Drovenmare drew breath." The ridge of the Grey Crowns fell away behind them. The land flattened. Hours passed. Merwin slept against him, in pieces, the way a person sleeps on horseback when the rider behind her has not let go for 1 breath. Each time she woke, his arm was still there. In the gray hour before dawn, the city of Sarvalin appeared on the horizon. Even from this distance, something was wrong. Varric's whole body went still behind her. The capital sat on a low hill, ringed in old white walls, and the great moonstone cathedral rose from its center like a tooth of pale rock. The walls should have been showing watchfires at this hour. The cathedral spire should have been crowned in the silver flame that burned every night when the king was in residence. The walls were dark. The spire was dark. And from 3 places inside the city, thin black columns of smoke were rising into the lightening sky. "No," Varric breathed. A rider came up out of the dawn at full gallop, one of his scouts. The man's horse was lathered and stumbling, and the man's face was the color of old ash. "Sire," the scout gasped, reining in. "Sire, they moved against the city the night you rode out. House Drovenmare and 3 of their pledged houses. They had agents inside the gates. They took the altar at midnight. They have declared the Lady Iselin the rightful claimed mate. Said the ceremony 4 months ago was valid and you have been incapable since." They have declared you mad. They have set themselves as regents pending your, The scout swallowed. Pending your recovery or your replacement, sire. How many of mine inside? Varric said. His voice had gone perfectly flat. Most of the household guard refused. They have been taken. The scout's eyes flicked to Merwin and away. Sire, they have the herbalist. Merwin went cold. The herbalist. The old woman in the lower city who had told her about the children. The only soul in Sarvelin who had known, except for Merwin herself, that 2 heartbeats lived inside her. Old Gwyneth, she whispered. They have Gwyneth. They have her in the cathedral square, my lady. They have built a platform. They are saying she will be put to question at noon, alongside the 11 royal guards who refused the new claim. Any subjects of the king who do not bend the knee by sunset will share the platform. Varric was silent for a long moment. Then he said, very softly, how many in total? 62 prisoners, sire. The 11 guards, the herbalist, the speaker's 2 undersecretaries, the kitchen staff who refused to serve the new house, the stable masters. The scout swallowed again. And a young scribe named Ilbin who is your nephew, sire? The horse beneath them went rigid as Varric's hand tightened on the reins. Ilbin. Varric had spoken of him exactly once, in the orchard cottage, late at night with his head in her lap, his sister's son. His sister had died in a fall from a horse 3 winters ago. The boy was 15. They will execute him first, Merwin said. She did not know how she knew. She knew. They will, Varric said. His voice was the voice of a man who had already left the conversation. It is the cleanest way to break me. I would surrender myself for the boy. They will use him to draw me onto the platform, and then they will kill me on the steps and call it a regicide of madness, and the throne will be Iceland's clean. Then we do not let them, Merwin said. Varric looked down at her. She had spent 4 months running. She had spent 4 months hiding. She had crouched behind a settle with arrows in her wall, and a man with a crossbow in her kitchen, and an army of assassins in her dooryard. And she had stood up. She had stood up, and put one of them down with light from her own ribcage. She was finished crouching. We do not let them have any of those people, Varric. Not the herbalist, not the scribe, not the kitchen girls. They are there because of me. They are all there because of me. They are there, Varric said gently, because House Drovenmare is rotten to its root. Not because of you. And they are still there. And the sun is rising. And we have hours, not days. The Alpha King of the Argent Hills looked down at the woman he had hunted across half a kingdom, who was carrying his children, who had a power in her ribs older than his own line, and his eyes had gone the color of forge iron. He turned in the saddle and raised one closed fist toward the column behind them. The riders stopped. The wolves on foot stopped. 300 faces turned toward him in the dawn. They have taken our city, Varric said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. They have taken our cathedral. They have taken 62 of our people, including my sister's son, and they intend to put them in the ground before sunset. We are going to take it all back. Now. Tonight. Before the bells of Sarvelin ring no nays. A low growl rose along the column, the sound a pack makes when the alpha has named the prey. Varric leaned down and kissed the top of Merwin's head. Stay close to me, he said. Whatever happens, stay close. By mid-morning, Varric's wolves had taken the lower city. It was done the way a wolf pack pulls down a sick deer, not from the front, from the throat and the soft places. 3 of his oldest captains went through the river gate disguised as fish haulers and opened the postern from the inside. A second band came over the western wall in the smoke of a deliberate Cooper Yard fire. By the time the bells of Sarvelin rang the 3rd hour, every gate stood open and the Drovenmire banners on the lower walls had been cut down. They lost 46 wolves and 2 of the captains. They reached the cathedral square by noon. Merwin watched from a stone-walled merchant's house on the southern edge of the square, 3 streets back from the platform. Varric had put her there himself, and put 2 of his own first pack with her. 2 huge silent men named Toralt and Brenneth, who would not have moved out of her doorway for a council edict. She had her hand on her belly, and the gold light banked low under her ribs, ready. The cathedral square below them was a wound. The platform stood in front of the great west doors, freshly built, the wood still pale at the edges. 62 prisoners knelt along its length, hands bound, mouths gagged. Drovenmeier's soldiers stood behind them in the red and silver. At the front, in a high carved chair that had been dragged out of the cathedral's side chapel, sat Iselin. She had changed clothes since the moor. She wore council white and silver again, her hair in the 7 sacred braids of a claimed mate, as if the 4 months between the cathedral and now had not happened. Her father, Lord Merrick Drovenmeier, stood at her right hand. The High Speaker, who had been forced to stand somewhere, stood at her left, his old face the color of ash. In front of the kneeling prisoners, slightly apart, 2 had been singled out. An old woman with a back bent like a willow, whose gray hair had come loose from its pins. Gwyneth, the herbalist. And a thin boy of 15 with his uncle's hairline and his mother's mouth. Ilben. The bells rang the 4th hour. Iselin rose from the carved chair. She walked to the front of the platform with the particular grace of a woman who has practiced standing in front of crowds since she was a child, and she raised her hands, and her clear, bell-toned voice carried across the square. People of Sarvalin, your king has not been seen in the capital for 1 month. Your king has been hunting a phantom across the moors of 3 provinces while the kingdom has burned. Your king has been ill. The council has known this for weeks, and out of love for him we have stayed silent. She paused. Beautifully timed. Merwin felt her teeth grind. Tonight, we will not be silent any longer. The king's claim of 4 months ago was lawful. The ceremony was witnessed. Whatever delusion has gripped him since, the law of the altar does not yield to delusion. I am the lawful queen of the Argent Hills, and these 62 souls before you have refused the lawful order of the lawful queen, and so they will be put to the sword. The square was silent. We will begin, Iselin said, with the boy. A Drovenmeier soldier stepped forward and laid a hand on Ilben's shoulder. The boy did not flinch. He lifted his chin. He looked, at 15, very much like his uncle. Merwin was already moving. My lady, no, Toralt said quietly. Open the door. My lady, the king's order was clear. You do not leave this house under any circumstance until he sends for you. Toralt. She turned. Her voice had gone very calm. It was the calm of a woman who has finished negotiating with herself. If that boy dies because the king's mate stayed safe in a merchant's house, the king will not forgive you. He will not forgive himself. He will not forgive me. Open the door. Toralt looked at Brenneth. Brenneth looked at Toralt. Some long, wordless conversation passed between them. Toralt opened the door. Merwin walked into the cathedral square in a healer's gray dress with her belly heavy in front of her, and the gold light banked under her ribs, and the crowd parted for her without understanding why. And she walked all the way to the foot of the platform before anyone on the platform realized what was happening. Iselin saw her first. The composed mouth went slack. The clear bell voice failed. Iselin took an unconscious step backward into her father's arm, and Lord Merrick Drovenmeier's face went through 3 expressions in 2 breaths, surprise and calculation, and something hungrier than either. Lord Merrick, Merwin called up. Her voice traveled. The square had gone perfectly quiet. I am the woman your daughter has been looking for. I am the one she came to the moor to kill last night. I am the mate of the Moonborn line. I am carrying the king's children, 2 of them. I will come up onto your platform of my own will, and I will kneel where you tell me to kneel, if you release every soul on those boards. All 62. Now. A great wordless shout went through the crowd. On the platform, Lord Merrick's eyes had gone bright. He understood at once what he was being offered. A dead servant girl was a problem. A dead servant girl with the king's heirs in her belly, who had walked into his hands of her own will in front of the assembled witnesses of the capital, was the foundation of a dynasty. "Father, no," Iselin said, low, urgent. "Father, kill her now. Kill her here. Do not let her on the platform. Do not let her speak again. You do not understand what she is." "Hush, daughter," Lord Merrick said pleasantly. He raised his voice. "Release the prisoners, all 62. Bring the lady up." The Drovenmire soldier holding Ilben stepped back. A second soldier began cutting the wrist bonds of the kneeling line. Gwyneth the herbalist looked across the platform at Merwin, and her old eyes filled, and she shook her head. "No, child, no." And Merwin smiled at her, the smallest possible smile, and walked up the steps. Two soldiers took her elbows. Their hands were not gentle. They led her past the line of prisoners, past Ilben, past Gwyneth, to the front of the platform, and they pressed her down to her knees on the rough new wood. Lord Merrick came down off the carved chair and stood over her. He looked at her belly. He looked at her face. He smiled. "Lady Mate," he said softly, for her ears only. "You have given me my whole house's future in one afternoon. I will be quick. You will not suffer." Merwin looked up at him. "You should have let your daughter kill me on the moor." "I am told my daughter tried." "She did. She failed. Do you know why?" Lord Merrick raised one eyebrow, indulgent. Underneath them, far down beneath the platform's new boards, beneath the cathedral square's old paving stones, beneath the whole hill of Sarvalin, something began to sing. It was the bond. Varric was close. Varric was coming. But it was something else too. Something rising up to meet the bond from inside her own chest. The two heartbeats beneath her ribs had begun to pound. Hard, fast, in time with each other. In time with the bond mark. In time with the gold light she had been banking under her ribs all morning. The light wanted up. Lord Merrick drew the long ceremonial dagger from his belt. The blade was the dull gray of silver-capped steel, a metal forged to suppress shifter blood. It would have killed her cleanly 4 months ago, on the night she had run. He raised it over the curve of her belly. Merwin closed her eyes. She let the light up. The light came up out of her the way a flood comes up out of a riverbed in spring. It was not the thin, pale gold she had used in the kitchen of the croft. It was not the wheat-colored thread she had let curl in her palm to show Varric. This was a deeper thing, an older thing, a thing that had been waiting 19 years inside her ribs and had just been called for the second time in 2 days. It came up through her throat. It came up through her open mouth. It came up out of the bond mark beneath her collarbone in a column of light the color of late summer honey, and it met Lord Merrick's descending blade in the air above her belly, and the blade stopped. Not because she caught it. Because the air around the blade had thickened. The silver-capped steel quivered an inch above the curve of her stomach, and Lord Merrick's whole arm spasmed and locked, and the long dagger dropped from his fingers and clattered on the platform boards beside her knee. The two heartbeats beneath Merwin's ribs were hammering. They were not afraid. They were furious. They had reached up through her own bones and taken hold of her power with 2 pairs of small, fierce fists, and they were pouring themselves into it. She opened her eyes. The square below the platform had gone silent in the way a forest goes silent when something very large walks through it. Every face was lit from beneath in honey-colored light. Everybody was very, very still. She rose. The light lifted her. The 2 soldiers who had been holding her elbows let go of her, as if she had become hot to the touch. She came up off her knees and stood in the center of the platform with the column of light pouring out of her chest and curling up around her shoulders. And she turned her head, slow and steady, and she looked at Iselin of House Drovenmire. Iselin's clear, bell-toned composure had finally come apart. Her platinum hair had come out of its 7 sacred braids. Her hands were up in front of her face as if she could hold the light off her by spreading her fingers. "Get her down," Iselin said. "Get her down." "My lady," Merwin said, and the sound that came out of her mouth had two voices in it, hers and a deeper one underneath. The voice of the old blood her grandmother had warned her never to let anyone hear. You came onto the moor last night to kill my children before they could draw breath. You stood and watched while a man in black tried to put a crossbow bolt into my belly. You called me an orchard girl, and you called this a door. She raised one hand. Iselin flinched. Walk through the door with me, then. The cathedral's great west doors blew in. They did not open. They blew in. The iron hinges cracked at the same instant, and the right-hand door went down across the platform with a crash that shook the steps, and through the gap came Varric. He was in his shifted form. He came across the platform's collapsed end as a wall of black fur and gold-fired eyes, and his first pack came after him in their shifts, 20 wolves the size of horses, and the household guards who had survived the lower city came after them, swords already drawn and red. The Drovenmire soldiers on the platform broke. Some ran, some tried to fight. The ones who tried did not last long. Varric's first pack flowed across the platform like water, and the platform was clear within a count of 20, and Merwin stood in the center of it with the column of light still rising out of her chest, and she did not stop the light, because the light was not done. Lord Merrick had bent for the dagger. He never reached it. Varric, in his shifted form, crossed the boards in 2 bounds and closed his jaws around the back of Lord Merrick's neck. And the great black wolf shook the Lord of House Drovenmire once, the way a terrier shakes a rat, and dropped him onto the platform, and Lord Merrick did not move again. Iselin had not run. She stood at the back of the platform with her hands still up in front of her face, and her eyes were on Merwin, and only on Merwin. And what was in those eyes was not fear. It was hatred. Pure and clean and very old. You were nothing, Iselin said. A healer girl from the lower city with a borrowed cloak. The bond should not have chosen you. It is a mistake of the line. It chose me, Merwin said quietly. And it chose them. She laid her free hand over her belly. The light pulsed there, twice, 2 small fierce pulses. And in front of the assembled witnesses of Sarvalin, with the High Speaker as witness, and the King of the Argent Hills as witness, and the children of the Moonborn line as witness, I name you, Iselin of House Drovenmire, oathbreaker, mate stealer, child killer in intent. By the old law of the altar, your braids are forfeit. Your name is forfeit. Your house is forfeit. She raised her open hand. The light went from her palm and crossed the platform and touched Iselin once, gently, on the brow. Iselin made a small sound. The 7 sacred braids that had been already half undone in her platinum hair came the rest of the way undone, and the hair itself went pale, paler, the platinum draining out of it like color out of a cloth left in the sun, until it was the dull, dry color of old straw. And the High Speaker, who had been standing frozen at the side of the platform, gave a low groan and turned his face away. What did you do? Iselin whispered. You are not of the Moonblood any longer, Merwin said. You will not shift again. Your wolf has been put to sleep. It will sleep until you die, and you will die a long way from here. She lowered her hand. The column of light banked itself back down beneath her ribs, slow, gentle, like a fire being covered for the night. The 2 heartbeats beneath her ribs settled. The square below had begun to make a sound, low and rolling, that was either weeping or the beginning of a cheer or both. Varric, in his shifted form, came to stand beside her. He did not shift. Not yet. He pressed his great dark head against her hip, the way the old wolf Orin had pressed his head against her ankles in the dooryard of the croft, and his gold eyes lifted to her face, and Merwin laid her hand on the top of his huge skull and let her fingers sink into the warm black fur. It is finished, she said softly, to him alone. He shifted. He came up out of the shift on his knees in front of her, battered and bloodied and utterly hers, and he laid his forehead against her belly the way he had laid it in the dooryard of the croft, and he held on. His first pack had begun to herd the surviving Drovenmares off the platform. The 62 prisoners had already been freed. Old Gwyneth was being helped down the steps by a young household guard, and her old face was wet, and she was smiling. Ilbin was sitting on the boards with his knees drawn up to his chest, alive. Merwin, Varric said into the cloth of her dress. His voice was not steady. I cannot do this without you anymore. The bond was never finished. I claimed you in the lodge with my teeth, but I have not claimed you in front of the line, and I have not let you claim me. I have been half a man for 4 months. Will you complete it? Here. Now. Where they tried to undo us. She knelt. She did not need to. She wanted to. She knelt in front of him on the bloody boards of the platform that had been built to kill her, and she took his face between her 2 hands, and she looked at him. Bare your throat, my king, she whispered. He tilted his head. She did not bite as he had bitten her. 4 weeks before the cathedral, in the old hunting lodge with the firelight on the rafters. She did not need to. She was old blood. She set her lips against the place where his neck met his shoulder, and she set her teeth against the skin, and she let the gold light come up under her tongue, and she pressed. The mark went into him through the light, not through the skin. She felt it land. She felt it set. She felt the bond, which had been stretched thin across 4 months and 3 provinces, and 1 drugged ceremony and 1 collapsed coup, snap shut around the 2 of them like a clasp closing on a chain. What came after was not in words. She saw the morning he had woken in the vestry and known she was gone. She saw him on his knees in her empty chamber with the broken pendant box in his hands. She saw the slow descent of a man who was being eaten alive from the inside by a bond that would not let him die and would not let him rest. He saw her too. The croft, the moor, the bond mark she had pressed her hand against in the dark. Every night. The 2 heartbeats. The cradle she had been carving by hand because she could not buy one without questions. The dreams she had been afraid to believe. When she lifted her mouth from the new mark on his throat, they were both shaking. My queen, Varric said. My king, Merwin answered. Below the platform, in the cathedral square, the wolves of Sarvalin began to howl. It was not a battle howl. It was the old howl, the one the packs of the Argent Hills had not raised together since the last moon-touched mate had walked beside the line, 7 generations gone. It rose up out of the square and over the white walls and out into the plain beyond, and somewhere on the moor, 3 nights' ride away, in a stone-walled croft Merwin would never see again, a goat named Bramble lifted her head from the heather and listened. The trials took 11 days. Iselin of House Drovenmire was sent in a closed wagon to the salt flats beyond the eastern coast, where she lived out her years as a kitchen woman in a fishing village, her hair the color of old straw, and her wolf asleep inside her, where it could not be reached. She did not write. No one wrote to her. 6 years later, a fever took her in the winter, and she was buried in unmarked ground. The remaining lords of House Drovenmire were stripped of their lands and their names. The great hall at 3 Hills was given to old Gwyneth, who turned it into a house of healing and trained 60 young women out of the lower cities in the small magics she had once been forced to swear she would never use. Old Orin Half-Tongue, first beta of the Moonborn line, walked with a limp for the rest of his days and never apologized for it. He retired the autumn after the cathedral, and he died peaceful in his sleep 4 years later, and his ashes were scattered on the moor where 6 gray wolves had once laid themselves down in an arc around a stone-walled croft. Merwin delivered the children on a clear summer night with the moon at the half. A boy first, dark-haired, with his father's gold eyes and his mother's quiet hands. A girl second, smaller, fiercer, who took one look at the world and bit the midwife's thumb. Varric held them both in the same breath and did not speak for a long time because there were no words. They were named Renoth, for the river meadow where the bond had first lit between their parents, and Sablen, for the borrowed cloak that had taken their mother out of the cathedral on the night the line nearly ended. The kingdom mended slowly. The crops came back the next spring. The feral packs along the border eased, and most of them came home. The Moonstone Cathedral's broken west doors were rebuilt in dark oak, and the old iron hinges that had cracked the day Varric came through them were melted down and reforged into a small, simple band that Merwin wore on her left hand for the rest of her life. She kept her old pendant in a small carved box beside the bed. She kept the cradle she had carved by hand on the moor in the children's nursery, even after they had outgrown it. On a warm spring evening, 11 months after the cathedral, Varric found her standing at the great window of the western tower, watching the last light go out of the sky over the Argent Hills. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her, and her bond mark hummed once, low and steady, as it would hum every day of her life. "Merwin," he said softly. "Yes, my love. I do not have the words for what I owe you." "You do not owe me anything, Varric. The bond chose us both. The bond chose me. You chose to walk back into a cathedral that had nearly killed you. Those are not the same thing." She turned in his arms. Below them, in the small inner garden of the tower, the children were chasing each other through the lavender beds. Renath on his sturdy legs, Sablin smaller and faster behind him. Both of them laughing the bright, impossible laugh of children who had been wanted from the moment their hearts began to beat. "I would do it again," Merwin said. "Every step of it. The moor, the croft, the platform, all of it. Because every step of it brought me back to this window." Varric bent his head and kissed her, slow and certain, the way a man kisses the woman whose name he had once roared across 3,000 wolves. Outside, the moon was rising over the Argent Hills, full and silver and unhurried, and from the inner garden came the laughter of two small voices that had nearly never been. And somewhere far below, in the lower city, an old healer was teaching a young girl how to set her hands above a wound and listen for the place where the body wanted to mend itself. The line had not ended. The line had only just begun. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.